I love teaching. I love putting together these presentations, and I'm super excited that you are here. Um, I Yes, so let's just dig into it. I will be talking pretty quickly. My goal is to get through some content. Again, you will receive the recording. So if you want to go back, slow down, take notes, you'll be able to do that. But one of the reasons why I go quickly is because I want to be able to talk to you at the end, get to any questions that you have. So let's get going. So my name is Pamela Barba. I use she, her pronouns. And I basically help people be known for the right things. My background is in graphic design. And as I launched my business and I started my career building like an online business presence, I realized that there was more to it than just like knowing the strategy, knowing like what's the right thing you should be doing. But there was also this like personal aspect. There's this vulnerability that comes with sharing yourself, sharing your voice, and putting your thing out there, which is why this session is talking about a little bit of both the strategy and the mindset piece, two things that I'm very passionate about. And so I want to tell you a little bit about my story and why I'm so passionate about this. I am an immigrant. My family moved here when I was 10 years old. And when we moved here, my family started over. And my family started over by starting a business. They started this business. You can see here this picture of my brother and our work trucks in our driveway. My parents on the bottom right at our warehouse, they sell flowers, they import flowers and they sell them all over the country. And when I was a kid growing up, watching my family build this business from nothing, I felt a lot of anxiety watching them do it because it felt like a lot of risk. It felt like they're putting a lot of time or a lot of attention into this initiative, and I'm not sure it's going to work. And it brought me a lot of anxiety. And so I kind of became really curious about like, what is a safe way to start a business? What is the way that you can do this that takes away the most risk possible? And so as I went on in my career, I went to design school. My degree is in graphic design. I later on went on to be a project manager in an app development company, and later went through a tech incubator. And what I learned is that there is actually a process, and it's very similar in all of these things, that helps you deal with starting something when you don't know, when there's a lot of things that you don't know, which is the case for creativity, which is the case for starting a business. And so I started what I started doing is to realize that there was this design process and that it could be applied to different things, and that it helped take away a lot of the anxiety and helped you build things in a way that where it's not so risky, right? Because there are some people that can build brands and businesses and they're just like sitting on cash and they can just throw a whole bunch of money at Facebook ads or whatever. But that's not most of us, and that's definitely not me. So let me tell you a little bit more about this design process. Ooh. So 3 things we're chatting about today. One is the design framework. 2 is perfectionism. And 3 is how you could launch your idea. So let's start with design thinking, and I'm going to keep calling it the design framework. A lot of different industries use this and use a different word or name for it. And one of the things that drives me crazy about tech and design is that we come up with these words that make something sound really complicated, and it does not need to be that complicated, right? So design thinking is a design methodology. And the things that I want to point out about it is that it provides a solution-based approach to solving a problem. And it's very useful in tackling complex problems where there could be many solutions, and it's like really it's unknown. You're walking in the dark. So this isn't something that you use to solve a math problem that has one correct solution. This is something that you use when there's a lot you don't know. And it really works by taking action, prototyping and testing things. And so this is one of the famous graphics for design thinking, where you start out with the big squiggle where you're like, oh, I don't know, there's this thing, I'm passionate about it. There could be so many solutions. And as you do research and as you get into it, you start getting a little bit more specific, like either here's this piece that I'm most passionate about or feel like this is my place to help, or I've identified a problem for my audience where this is really the thing where they're getting stuck. And you start getting less and less, more and more specific, and get clarity and become focused on a solution. And so this is the kind of like the formal design thinking process. This was developed in the D School in Stanford, but it really is this process of, and again, design thinking as a word, I feel like when I first learned about it, I kind of was obsessed about it, and I was like, I want to learn more. Like, what is this thing? And I would like go to a workshop or something, and they would explain it, and I'm like, that's it. That's like super simple. And that kept happening over and over, and I kept thinking that there was like a piece that I was missing or something, but it's really a simple process. And actually, if you remember like seventh grade science, it very much like the scientific process. So it starts with this process of empathizing, of understanding either your audience or yourself, and what is the problem that you want to fix, that you see in the world, that you feel passionate about. And then as you empathize and you're kind of doing research, talking to people, exploring within yourself, you start to define like, what is the thing that I could do that I want to test, right? Like maybe I want to focus on this part of the problem. Then becomes the ideate part, where you're like, here are some solutions that might fix that. Let me try prototyping the one that I think I want to try right now. And then once you prototype it, you put it out there and you test it and you see what happens. So to give you an example, back in 2017, I became really passionate about the Latino wage gap. The Latino wage gap is the biggest for all women, at 54 cents to the dollar, right? And so I became really passionate about this. And that's where I kind of started my empathize stage. And I said, how can I research this? How can I know my experience, how can I talk to more folks and see what their experience was like? Am I alone? What is the thing that happened, right? And so then I moved on to the define stage. And I said, okay, I think I'm starting to understand why I'm starting to understand. Well, actually, in the emphasize stage and into the define stage, I started to wanting to focus more specifically on entrepreneur women. And so I started to see what was the difference between people that came from different backgrounds, from different class, race, ethnicities, and seeing how that compared to some of the women that I was speaking to. And so from that point, I was like, okay, I think I have a few ideas as to like how I could make an impact on this. Let me build a prototype. And so, some of it was like lack of network. A lot of people coming from immigrant families didn't have access to the same networks and opportunities. So that was like one idea. I could have tried to build a network. Another thing that I realized, it had a lot to do with mindset and the things that we believe that we can ask for. And that's the part that I became really interested in. So I said, how can I start talking to people about mindset, start talking about like abundance mentality and all of these kind of like coachy concepts. So that was my prototype. And I started having events and spaces where I discussed this so I could test to see if other people resonated with this as well. Lean startup is another word that is used to describe the same process. And again, I don't ever want us to get stuck on the words, because I feel like they're a barrier of entry, and I don't think they should be that way. And so again, with this process, if you looked at it from a lean startup methodology, I designed my test. I measured to see who interacted. And the measure stage, you want to be able to use actual data. So at some points, I was testing using Instagram. I had a list of topics, and I was like, I think my people are passionate about these topics. And I would put out the topics consistently to be like, wow, people get really riled up when I mention this topic. What can I learn? How can I implement that back into my design, and maybe build more curriculum around it? And so the thing to know with this is that big companies use this methodology all of the time. They don't know everything, and they move forward without knowing everything. And I can tell you, I've talked to mentors and people from all kinds of companies, and they will tell you, we don't know, like this is something that we're learning, or we know this piece, but we're trying to figure this out. And there is no way to know everything. Even the companies that were the most established, the industries that were the most established, look at what happened in 2020. there was all of a sudden a different circumstance where they had to stop and figure out what is the changing landscape and how can we adapt and, survive in this, right? Whether it's changing our services, adapting our brand, changing our language, etc. And so we're being tested on all the time. I don't know if you've ever noticed this, maybe if you have different Instagram accounts or Facebook accounts or really whatever platform you use. These three screenshots right here, you'll notice that some of the icons are slightly different. And it's because they're testing. All of the time, they're saying, we think users will do this, and they'll put it out there and they'll test it. And then they'll see if users actually do that. And so you can use this design process to test out your ideas and to work on developing a strong brand, a strong business, a strong whatever it is, without the pressure of feeling like you have to know everything. And a big difference is that Instagram doesn't get its feelings hurt if you delete the app or if somebody unsubscribes from their newsletter, right? And that's why speaking about mindset and perfectionism is an important piece to this, because it's really different when you have a founder that started a company years ago, sells it, like they're completely detached from it. They have an army of employees that are implementing versus like me, Pamela, putting my shaky voice and video out there and trying to see if people resonate with it. So an important piece of it is understanding how different it is when we talk about these processes and how they're implemented by big companies versus you if you're the person implementing it. So that is why it's, as I mentioned, I want to talk about perfectionism, the second thing I'm going to mention today. So social media makes it look like everybody has figured it out. Like their brand is perfect, like their career is perfect, like their business is perfect, like their art is perfect. And I'm being broad when I speak here because I think this process can be used to launch any of these things, your brand, your business, your art, your career. It's just a way of thinking. It's just a framework of thinking about putting yourself out there. And when social media shows us all, like everybody's, you've heard the whole like highlight reel, it can make us feel like, if you already felt like, oh my gosh, I'm not sure what to do next, and look at what those people are doing, it can make you feel like kind of dig deeper into that feeling. It creates this like impossible standard because you feel like you have to be perfect right when you're starting. And the reality is that when we're starting something, we're going to be bad at it. There's still going to be pieces that we're figuring out, whether it's your branding, your language, whether you're still figuring out what you want to call yourself. If you're starting like an art career or whatever, these are all the pieces that are coming together. And one of my favorite phrases is to be brave enough to be bad at something new. And that is part of what this process, I believe, encourages. And so the problem number one that I see with this is that we develop unrealistic expectations of what it looks like to start something. And the reality is that when other people were starting things, they were just as messy. Maybe you just didn't see them in that stage. Maybe it was before the internet. Maybe they weren't getting that much attention, so you didn't see what their messy videos looked like. One of my favorite coaches, her name's Tiffany Hahn, and she's incredible. And if you look up her brand now, it is like super polished. I fangirl all day. I think she's really great. But the other day I found her YouTube video, like her very first YouTube video from 10 years ago. And I love that she left it up, and she left it up on purpose because she wanted to see people to see what it looked like to start. And she was awkward and nerdy, and I loved it. And it just gave me so much life and permission to know that I can be awkward and nerdy as I'm starting out. I can be bad at it. I can be this weird looking cake. And then eventually with repetition and time, things get better. The second problem that I see as I work with people on helping them launch things is that because you're creating something, and most of the people that I work with are so passionate about that thing that they're creating, whether it's tied to racial justice or it's tied to their personal experience in a way that some way that they want to serve their communities, we really, really care about it. A lot of the times, the people that I work with, it's tied to their personal story. It's very, very personal. And when we start putting ourselves out there, we believe that our self-worth is tied to whether this thing succeeds or not. I remember the first time somebody unsubscribed from my newsletter, I stopped emailing for like 6 months. And total true, one person unsubscribed, and I got into my feelings about it, and I was like, I have to stop emailing. I have to stop. I have to like rethink everything. And so this is a problem because it keeps us from taking action. It keeps us from this idea of perfection and I have to show up in a certain way. It keeps us researching, watching webinars, watching other people create content, create things. And I think if you're a creative or you have this need to write, to create, you get what I call the crabby creative syndrome, which is when you're watching everybody do the thing and you feel a little crabby that you're not doing the same thing, that you're not putting these things out there, that you're not creating the solutions that you think you could create. And so a couple things to think about with these specific problems, if any of these resonate with you, is one, as I mentioned, nobody knows what they're doing. Everybody is testing along the way, even the giant companies with all the money who look perfect. So it's totally okay if you have an idea for a brand, a business, or even like an art part of your career where you're just starting out. The second piece is you have to find a way to start detaching your self-worth from your idea. As if like, if your idea fails, it's simply something that you did that didn't work. It does not reflect on you as a person, or on your self-worth or value at all, because those are things that are inherent to you and cannot be taken away. And finally, the last thing that you can do is to take action, and to take messy action, to make the video like I'm talking about, this coach who is now incredible, where you're awkward and, laughing at your own jokes, and maybe your graphics don't look the best. It doesn't matter. Just taking action is what helps you kind of get out of this loop. And so now I'm actually moving through this really quickly. So this is great. So maybe we'll get some time to talk at the end. A lot more time than I thought. So the last thing is how to leverage design thinking to launch your idea. So we talked about kind of the design framework. I went through it very quickly. And then we talked about perfectionism and how this framework is different when you are the person that's launching. And also just on the perfectionism thing, be careful who you're learning from. What I've seen in my time as an entrepreneur, learning from other people, is that sometimes people are telling you about a process that they themselves didn't have to do, or maybe their background, their access looked different. And so I really encourage you to learn from people that share your experience or understand where you're coming from in some way. But some, I've seen a lot, I'm in the design field and I see a lot of design professionals giving advice that's really, really good for somebody that's like 5 years in their business. But in reality, if you're just starting out, that advice is really, really difficult to do. So I'm a big fan of simplicity and just starting somewhere and starting in a messy way. And then you can build up to that. And so to start to launch your idea, I think it's really important to view everything that you do as an experiment, to view yourself as a scientist, to remove yourself from the process, to approach it from a place of curiosity. Like, what would happen if I launched a newsletter every week for a month, and I just, I saw how many people opened it, and I didn't freak out like Pamela and stop writing the minute that one person unsubscribes. And then the next thing is to design your experiment. And so another big word you'll hear a lot in the tech world is minimum viable product. Minimum viable product is what is the low commitment, like quickest way that you can test an idea that you have. So whether it's like, I kind of have this idea to start a new service, or I kind of have this idea to start this membership, or I kind of have this idea to start this brand that doesn't exist, or that whatever it is, what is the quickest way, the lowest friction way that you could test this? And so how to you have to create here with the lean startup methodology, we're kind of starting in the design stage. You have to create an MVP for your idea. So you're picking one variable of your idea that you want to test, and it's really important to be specific to what variable you're testing at any given time. That is what makes this work. So as I mentioned earlier, when I was testing out topics with a community that I was building, everything stayed the same. The audience stayed the same. When I posted stayed the same. How I posted stayed the same. The only thing that changed in that instance were the topics that I was testing out. So that gave me like a true idea of, if I just switch out the topic, what will happen. Sometimes what I see people do is that they change too many variables at once, and they don't stick with one test long enough so that they can actually see what's happening. So if you remember, an equation in math, right? Like, you're always testing for one variable at a time. And so for me, one of the first things that I did when I was doing my research for Latina economic empowerment is I created this form, and I just waited to see who responded. And then in this one, what was interesting is that I was using the word Latina entrepreneurs, and I had to kind of stop my experiment as I started talking to people, because I realized that a lot of the people that I wanted to talk to didn't use the word entrepreneur to describe what they did. So that's an example of like a quick learning. So after I put out this call to action, I started using different words to describe it. I started trying out like side hustler. I started talking about like, are you selling something? Because I would talk to people and they're like, I don't consider myself an entrepreneur. And I'd be like, okay. And then they'd be like, but I've been selling necklaces online for the last 5 years. And I'm like, okay, cool, that's fine. So an important thing to think about as you're putting out your test is, what is the language that your audience uses? And you can use your test as a way to find what is the language that they resonate with. So for example, I might put out this form and I might put it out in 3 different spaces with 3 different words to see if the different words attract different people. Yes. So in order to measure, this is where the action piece comes in. And this is why it's so detrimental when we get stuck not taking action and not putting that thing out, is because the only way you can know if people are going to react to something is if you put it in front of them and you see if they click, they buy, they join, they sign up, they whatever it is, right? And a lot of the times when we get stuck in our heads and in planning and in research mode, we're not able to gather that data to see if people showed up, if people cared. And kind of the last thing is to look at your data and see, like, what did you learn? Is there a part of your test that you need to adjust? Is there a language? Is there an audience change that you need to make? And so I want to give you an example of this. One of my favorite examples is from the company Zappos, which sells shoes online. They started selling shoes online. That's hard to say. Before that was a thing, back in the day when that felt like, who would buy shoes online, right? And so when they started wanting to sell shoes online, they used the lean startup methodology. So instead of going, locking themselves up in a building, spending hours and so much money developing a platform to sell shoes, they wanted to test the question that they had, which was, are people willing to buy shoes online? Is that a thing that people would be interested in? Because if they're not interested in that, it's not worth it to spend all that money doing that. And, back to connected to when I was talking to you about like my family and their business, this is the kind of thing that I was looking for. Like, how could we test this and see if it's going to work before we spend a lot of money and time into building that thing? And so with the Zappos example, one of the biggest risks was that question, will people buy shoes online? And so what the founder did is that he went to shoe stores, like brick and mortar shoe stores, and he said, hey, I'm interested in selling shoes online, but I don't have inventory or stock or anything yet. Could I take pictures of the shoes that you have here, post them on the internet, and if they sell, I promise I'll come here, I'll buy the shoe, and then I'll ship it out to whoever bought it. And so that was his MVP for testing the idea of, are people, is this something that people are interested in? And is this an action that they're actually going to take? And once he was able to prove that, he was able to move into building that platform in a way less risky way. And so with lean startup methodology, and if this is something that interests you, there's a book called Lean Startup that goes into this in great detail. And the way that it works is you kind of list out what are all the questions that you have, what are all the assumptions that you have about this idea, and what are quick ways that you can test one by one. And you always start by testing, like, what is the riskiest thing? Because a lot of the times we can start to focus on, like, well, what about the logo? And what about, I don't know if I like that yellow color or whatever, when in reality, that it doesn't matter yet, right? So again, I encourage you to look into that book if this is something that is interesting to you. I think it's a really great tool for when you're building a business, and it can help you figure out what is the right business model, what is the right product that you're developing. And again, a lot of terminology that makes this feel inaccessible, but at the end of the day, it's pretty simple. And so when you are building a brand, what I teach my clients is the Brilliant Brand Framework, which essentially is like, there are 4 parts of your brand that are present at all times, right? Who are you? What's your brand about? What are your goals? That's the bottom of the pyramid. I believe that's the most important. I believe that you build a brand and a business to support your goals and the things that you want to be doing. The second part is, who needs to know? Who's the audience? Who are you passionate about helping? Who are you the best equipped to help? Who's coming to you for help? And the more specific that you are, it helps you connect to them in a deeper way. And that deeper way is what actually starts communities, what moves people to buy. And this is true too, if you're thinking about this in your career, who are you? And then who needs to know? Again, being focused on your audience is so important. The next part of the framework is, why should they care? What value do you bring to them? What thing can you teach them? What pain point can you resolve for them? It's really, really important to be focused on understanding that people are selfish and they're worried about their survival, and they're not, uh, you know, the person that unsubscribed from my newsletter, I wasn't solving a problem for her. It had nothing to do with me personally. I wasn't solving a problem for her. The content that I was giving wasn't something that she was struggling with, and it was that simple. And it had nothing to do with me. And finally, the last part of the Brilliant Brand Framework is, how will they find you? So how are you going to get publicity, best visibility? How are you going to convert people into customers, into whatever the next thing is for you? And so with this framework, what I like about this framework is that it goes really nicely with the design thinking methodology, because you can choose to focus on one of these things to test at a time. So it could be, okay, I know who I am and I know what I want to sell, but I'm not sure who my audience is. So let me put some tests out there so that I can identify who is connecting with me, who is reaching out, what words are they using to describe what they do. Or I know who I am and I know who my audience is, but I'm not sure what problem I solve for them. So what are the problems that they're having that I feel like I can help with? What are the things that I'm passionate about? And then once you have that, it's like you can try out different social media networks, or different ways of people to finding you. And all of this is rooted in what works best for you as a person. Because again, there's the strategy piece of this, and then there's I'm a human that's running and making decisions for this brand, and both of those things need to be aligned. So I just wanted to give you a couple more examples. I think starting an Instagram account is one of the best ways of testing an idea. A lot of the times I have family members that approach me and they're like, hey, I have this idea. And I'm like, great, start an Instagram account and start posting. And there's Instagram for, of course, like there's Instagram where you're like trying to grow and you're trying to get likes and you're trying to get engagements. And there's that aspect of it, which is its main purpose. But I see it as a tool to help you figure out, what are you passionate about enough about this that you're going to want to be continuing to post in a month? Or can you clarify what you do, like so that you do it in 1 or 2 sentences? Or are you trying out different visual styles, and can you put them on here and see how they look? To me, it's a really, really great testing tool for you to be developing your voice and for you to be developing the way that you think about this. And so back to the Brilliant Brand framework, don't forget to include like who you are, your ideal audience, and what's the value that you bring to them. An important part, and to be really specific about what is this thing that you're testing. So for example, when I was running Vamos Ladies brand, which is the brand that I've been mentioning about economic empowerment for Latinas, I could see if I changed my headline to economic empowerment, what happens? Let me do that for like a month and let me see what happens. If I use my picture and run the page as a Pamela instead of running it as a brand with a logo, what happens? And I'm seeing how people react to it, but I'm seeing how it feels for me. And I think that is so important. A huge, huge component of promoting yourself in a way that is sustainable is you have to find the way that feels right for you. And so an Instagram account can be a great way of testing different ways of making content. Maybe I make some videos and I'm like, wow, I really loved making videos. Like that was my favorite part of doing this. And that's the takeaway that I get from it. And so if you have an idea, and another great thing about an Instagram account is that it can be separate from you. Sometimes when we first have ideas, they're like little delicate babies that we're not ready to show to other people. We're not ready to, like be carrying it around with us all the time. Like it's something that we need to nurture. And sometimes in private, sometimes we have people in our lives that are not supportive or won't understand, or maybe they, like this person that unsubscribed from my email, they're not even really thinking about you, but for some reason you care a lot about what they think. So I think starting a different account just to have a little bit of space sometimes can be really, really healthy. And then as you get more confident, which is a process, you're not going to get confident about it overnight. You can start bringing on and adding on people into it, or saying, hey, I'm doing this thing. At first, when I started my Vamos Ladies brand, it was just a page on my website where I was like, I'm passionate about this thing. And then eventually over time, the more that I talked about it, the more that I put it out there, the more it became its own thing. This is something else that I did. Another test that I did, actually, that came before Vamos Ladies. There was this book list that this writer put out. And I was like, oh my gosh, this sounds like an amazing book list. I kind of want to start. This was at a point where living in Atlanta, I felt very disconnected from my Latinx culture. And I was like, I wonder if other people feel the same way. I kind of want to have like a feminist book club. And so I put together this form, and I was blown away when so many people signed up for it. There was like 80 people signed up for it because the person who wrote this list saw it and she shared it. So this was like an incredible way of saying, hey, I have an audience, I have a problem, I have a thing I think we should be doing. Let me put it out there and see what happens. And the thing that I feel like nobody tells you about putting yourself out there is that we have this idea that when we start doing that, we're going to be like screaming into the dark. But in reality, what happens is that people answer back, and you get to have conversations and meet people. And there's this cool back and forth that happens when you start and put something out there. Something else that you can do if you have a business or, and you've been thinking about adding a service, you could start a mini offer, something small. This is something that I launched last year. It was a 1-month thing, low price. There was no website for it. There was no sales page. There was an Instagram graphic. And I saw who signed up, and I said, if 10 people sign up for this, then I'll run it. And so again, thinking about like there are all these barriers of entry, and especially in the entrepreneurial world, there's like the lead magnet and the webinar and the this and the that. And there are really some really simple ways where you could put something out there, see how it feels to you, pick something to test about it, and just put it out. Yeah, and I just promoted it on my Instagram. These are a couple of the stories that I put on there. Silly. I did it in the moment. It was fun. That's something that I encourage. If like find a way to make it fun for you. If Instagram makes you want to pull your eyes out, don't do it on Instagram. Maybe LinkedIn is your thing. That's totally fine. There is not one thing that you should do or one place where you should be. And launching an online course, again, don't get stuck on the platforms. You could spend so much time thinking about Teachable, Kajabi, all these things. I did a Google document with links to Loom videos. So there are very simple ways for you to do this. With e-commerce stores, I've seen people use Instagram and just take pictures of their products and just put them on Instagram and saying, if you want to buy this, DM me and I'll send you a PayPal, a PayPal bill, invoice via email. And so again, focusing on the MVP, minimum viable product, what's the quickest, less risky way that you could test if somebody's going to do something? If you're going to sell service online, like I mentioned, you can just make a graphic and invoice people. And mine, I did inside a Facebook group, like using mostly free or very cheap tools, and not getting stuck on this idea of I have to have the perfect platform, the perfect brand, or the perfect anything. I have a set of assumptions that I'm making about whether people will care about this or not, and I'm going to figure out how I can test them. I love to use Animal Crossing as an example. Hopefully there's some Animal Crossing fans here in the house, but this is a game that is very popular right now. But essentially you're on this island. And on this island, your job is to like pick fruit and like build your little house and plant flowers. And when you first start on Animal Crossing, you don't have that many tools. Like you have access to like sticks and to rocks. And so you make a little axe that is really flimsy. Actually, it's called the flimsy axe, and it breaks easily. And it like literally after you hit something 3 or 4 times, it like breaks, but it's enough so that you can get the job done. And so I love to use this example of a great way to launch. Over time, you get to build a stronger tool, and your flimsy axe goes into like a very strong axe. I forget what this one is called. But this is the perfect way to think about launching something. At first, you're just seeing if it works, how it feels, who responds. And then over time, you can perfect it and really make it better. Instead of expecting that perfection from the beginning, allow yourself to have the like wild looking cake of Ariel cake and know that if you make enough cakes, then it's not going to look like that anymore. Cool. So a couple reminders. It's okay to not have all the answers before you start. It's okay to have a lot of questions. Don't get stuck looking at and researching the perfect tool, the perfect webinar, the perfect coach, the perfect whatever. Pick something simple and move on, and you can change it, switch it, perfect it over time. A big thing is do an experiment for long enough to see if it's working. Don't stop emailing people if one person unsubscribes from your list. Don't start posting if your mom texts you and says, what's this new account I saw, whatever. You have to do it for long enough, testing the same thing to see if it's viable. And from a brand perspective, I'm a graphic designer, full permission for it to look like whatever at first. I've been doing presentations for a while now, and I just started designing my own presentations like in the last few months, because at first I was like, I just need to get this out of my head. So the strategy is more important than how it looks. So I always recommend that you focus on the strategy, that you focus on your people, that you focus on adding value. And that's it.